All right.
Hey,
Hey,
how you doing?
I'm doing well. Calling Rick Byer in.
Saint Vaast la Hogue in Normandy.
Ah, that
I
sounds
know
like
you
fun.
can't, yeah, you can't see it, but I because of the way my camera's set up, we're having problems. But look at what I've got.
Ah, where'd you get that? I know what it is, but where'd you get it?
Yeah, it's from the British Memorial, where the exhibit is back up. With We
Oh,
Stand
okay.
with Giants exhibit is back up at the British Memorial, and they're selling those. And so
Uh,
I bought one, and I'm excited to bring it back home and make it part of the History Happy Hour background every day. And Chris Anderson, calling you. Where are you?
well, I am in Lisbon, where I've spending a few days before I get on a cruise that we're going to meet later, and I'm going to be a talking head on a cruise, as you will be too.
I'm going to be talking on the cruise about something. Who knows
Yeah,
what?
but But see, I have
I,
since this is a show and tell. You didn't ask. I'm a little hurt, but you've noticed I have new glasses, right?
you're very small in my screen
Yeah.
because I'm on my phone because I had technical problems with my
Oh.
computer.
Well,
So,
I
but I see
found
your glasses. They look good.
I found the company where Winston Churchill got his glasses, and they're still in
Oh,
business. So I got frames from the same company that Winston did. I'm hoping that it helps
wow.
with my
Wow.
IQ. It hasn't yet.
If
So
you
there you go.
come to the exhibit at Standing with Giants exhibit at the British Memorial, which, by the way, is a life-size silhouette of every British Commonwealth, I should say Commonwealth soldier, airman, nurse, etc., who died on D-Day. There's 1,500 of them, and it's quite overwhelming to see it. It's quite
Yes.
overwhelming. That you can get, not only you can get that, you can get a silhouette of Winston Churchill.
Oh, there you go.
So
But
you
I've
might
got
want
his
to
glasses, so I don't.
save your money there. Uh, I should just say welcome everybody to History Happy Hour. Thanks to Stephen Ambrose Tours for helping to support this show. Check out their rich offering of military history tours at stephenambrosetours.com. And whether you're watching live or watching on replay or listening on the HHH, help me out, Chris.
Podcast.
Yes, we're glad you're here. And today we'll be talking with Lynne Olson about the Ravensbrück concentration camp. So let us know what you're drinking. And we should, Chris, thank everyone who supports us on
We
Patreon.
should. Let me just get to that, and we
I
will.
know Chris is in charge of all the
Yeah,
visuals
bear
today
with me,
because I'm
guys.
in my hotel room is not doing well with me. So
See, look
yeah,
at
look at
that.
that. Chris, you are a pro. Yeah.
I
So
know,
you
right?
can join this group of top shelf patrons or a patron at any level, honestly, by clicking on patreon.com/slash
Es-
history happy hour.
Especially because now Rick needs a new computer. So.
Yeah, man, I might. I don't know. I'm a little apprehensive. I don't know if it's the computer, the hotel room, the internet, the whole thing. But you can
Oh,
take the top shelf patrons off now. So,
okay, okay.
so
Well,
we can go
okay.
back to us because Lynn is sitting there in the green room
Yes, let's
going,
do that.
waiting, waiting, wait, I'm waiting.
All right, I'm
But
going to do that.
is there? Do we have anybody in the audience?
Oh, we do.
You
Oh,
know?
okay. All right, all right. We do. We have Cheryl's joining us from North Carolina, and Jan Boyle from St. Louis, Ken from Kansas, Ron from Western Mass, and Candace from Wyoming, and Doreen. Doreen's back. Hey, it's great to see Doreen back.
Oh,
Yeah.
great, great.
So
I had
yeah.
some folks on my tour. I'm here with a tour. I'm not just traveling on my own, and who said they would be
Oh,
watching, but I don't know if any of them are there. And if you are there and you're on my tour, because of my technical problems, can't see your names. So I'm sort of in the dark here.
you are in the dark.
But I am in the dark. There's dark on both sides of me. So, Chris, why don't we,
Start.
it's up to you, but why don't we get started with the
All
show?
right. So brrrr, boom. Gotta let me scroll down here. Hold on. There we go. Open.
Oh my gosh, it's got a wire in it. Can you hear that? You're frozen. Oh my God, what's going on? Can you hear me? Oh no. Earth to Chris. Oh no. Okay, we're having some technical problems, and I don't know who can hear or see what, but I don't see Chris Anderson, and we need him back to get started. And now I'm the only one left here on this show. I'm not sure what's going on, folks, but Chris and I are both in hotel rooms, and we are each, I think, having some issues with the internet. And I am doing the show via my phone, and I am unable to actually bring up our guest, see the questions from viewers, etc. So I am just here in the dark waiting for Chris to come back on so that we can bring you Lynne Olson. I've been in Normandy for 8 days, and we have gone through all of the sites of Normandy, and we'll be leaving Normandy tomorrow for
There he is.
another
Hey,
place.
we
But
back?
here's Lynne
Okay.
Olson. Okay, and
Yeah,
Chris
sorry
Anderson.
guys. It's been a blast. All right. So what have you been talking about while I've been away? All right.
Okay,
Nothing. All
let's
right.
go.
So let's get started. All right. So as you guys have probably figured out, we're really excited to have one of our favorite authors back on History Happy Hour this week. Lynne Olson is back to talk with us about the Sisterhood of Ravensbrück, how an intrepid band of French women resisted the Nazis in Hitler's all-female concentration camp. Lynne is the author of many of my most favorite books, including Last Hope Island, The Murrow Boys, and a book I read every year, A Question of Honor. But most importantly, she's very, very patient, and she is a History Happy Hour alumni. And we are here to talk about her new book on Ravensbrück. Let me just scroll back up and stick the cover back out there, right, really quick. Ta-da! 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 All right. So, Lynne,
That
thank
was
you.
quick.
Welcome.
Okay.
It was quick. We'll put it back up again in a bit.
This is so exciting. I can really wait to see what happens next.
I know,
I know.
right?
I know. This is the third time we've been doing this show for 5 years. You'd think we'd be good at it by now, but
Yeah.
no such
You
luck.
are good at it. You are.
But I do have a cocktail, so that's what's
You do?
important. So I'm good with that.
And Lynn, what do you have?
I have water. It's 4:00
Ah,
here in Washington,
yeah,
so
true.
it's a little
Well,
water.
I have Portuguese beer, which kind of is like water, but that was what was on the minibar. So,
Okay.
all right. So
All right.
anyway,
Well, Christian.
let's
Oh,
get.
wait a minute. Hang on.
Yeah.
Hang on.
What?
Yeah, hang on.
At least the bell works. Okay, good.
The bell is working. It's here. Go ahead.
All right, so let's get started. In the book, you focus primarily on four incredible women that we'll talk more about in detail. But how did you come upon these women, and what was it about them that grabbed you?
Well, it's a very long story. I mean, I've written, as you guys know, I've written a lot of books, most of them about World War II. And the last 3 books, including this one, have been, I mean, my earlier books really focused on the UK, England, and the US to some extent. But the last 3 books I've written have been about France, and particularly women and the resistance in France. In other books, previous books, like Last Hope Island, I wrote a lot about resistance movements in not only in France, but in other occupied countries in Europe. And I just, in doing research, especially about the French resistance, I was just stunned by the number of women I came across that I had never heard of. And I was pretty sure that most people had never heard of. And so I really got into that groove, writing about these women. And these particular women that I write about in the Sisterhood of Ravensbrück are women that some of them that I've run across before in research for other books. And the more I did learn about what these women went through at Ravensbrück, I mean, just tiny bit of background about women and the resistance. Basically, after the war, men claimed all the credit for the resistance, even though women were the lifeblood of the resistance. They basically delegated women to the background, and that continued, for 5-6 decades after the war. I mean, women were really totally overlooked. That has changed to some extent. The last 5 years, there have been quite a few books about women in the French resistance, including one by me. But they all basically focused on what the women did in France during the war. Very few, almost none, talked about what happened to the women, more than 10,000 of them, who were captured by the Gestapo and sent to either German prisons or German concentration camps. And also totally forgotten, or totally not ever known, was the fact that many of these women actually resisted in the camps. And that was particularly true for the only all-female concentration camp in Germany, and that was Ravensbrück. And so I just thought that was all really, really interesting. And, I started looking into it and came up with these 4 women. Now, first of all, it wasn't just the French who resisted Ravensbrück. There were others too. But the French were particularly active in doing it. And their stories were just incredible. I just found them so interesting. And so basically, I chose 4. They were leaders. But there were dozens of other French women who were actually also involved in this, what I call the Sisterhood.
No, Rick, I just want to add one really quickly. But I know you say that there are other people who resisted, and there were, and we can talk about them. But you actually make a point in the book of saying that there are people in the camp at the time that say, well, the Poles kind of just, they're Polish, so this is like another tale of woe for them. But the French, they're used to not sitting down. They actually kind of, there's something sort of about them.
There was a really interesting quality about the French that I think that's true of men too. The French women, the French are basically, they are resistors in a sense. They don't, especially these women, didn't like anyone telling them what to do. And they have this great kind of caustic sense of humor that they really showed at Ravensbrück. The Poles had been through so much. I mean, God, their history, their country is just one horrific
tragedy
story
after another.
Exactly. So that they're steeped in tragedy. They've been occupied, I don't know how many times. And so they are fairly tragic. I mean, and they went through hell during World War II. The French had never been occupied. I mean, part of France had been occupied in World War I, but Paris and the area around there hadn't been occupied. And they just had a different spirit. It was just like, basically F you to the Germans. I mean, when they came in, and they basically, they were told by Germaine Tillion, who's one of the women that I write about, when the younger women came in from France, she basically told them that if they had any chance of surviving, they had to band together and form a sisterhood, form a community. They had to take care of each other. Alone, they would die. There was no question they were going to die. They might die anyway, but they had a fighting chance if they banded together. And then by banding together, then they could also resist within the camp. And that really became kind of a mantra for many of the French women who came to Ravensbrück.
So the picture we're seeing is Germaine Tillion.
That's Germaine Tillion.
Tell us a little bit about her.
Oh, she's an astonishing person. She is basically France's version of Margaret Mead. She was a young anthropologist in the 1930s who was one of the very few female anthropologists in France. She spent 6 years in the mountains of Algeria studying Berber tribes, these fierce Arab tribes in the mountains, and everybody warned her. These were murderous. They would. It was not a place for a woman to go there, and she basically said, I'm going anyway, and she did, and they welcomed her, and she spent 6 years studying their society, how they worked, how the families worked, how the kinship, worked, and when she came back to France just as the Germans invaded France in 1940, and just as Pétain capitulated to Germany, and she was one of the very early resistors. I say in the book that there was a common expression among the early resistors, which was something must be done. They didn't know what it was, but something must be done, and they were very, very much in the minority. I've written so much about France in the last few books, and I every time I do, I think about what it must have been like to be in a country which the French never thought they were going to be occupied. Everybody thought the French army was going to roll over the Germans when they came in, or if they tried to come in, and of course the opposite happened. And the invasion, the occupation took only a couple of weeks. And so everybody was in shock, and most people, the only thing they were thinking about is keeping their heads down and trying to figure out how they were going to survive. But Germaine Tillion was one of the very few who basically said, she was so enraged by what had happened and by Pétain's capitulation that she immediately got involved in resistance work, which was, non-existent. They had to figure out what to do, and so she was one of the leaders of the first organized resistance network in Paris called the Museum of Man Network, so right from the beginning, she was one of the leaders of the resistance movement. It was a really interesting time. It's another thing that I think most people don't know about. Women in 1940, June, summer of 1940, fall of 1940, were really kind of the engines of the resistance movement, because most of the men who were young or middle-aged were in the army, and many of them had been captured by the Germans, and a lot of them they hadn't been demobilized, the ones who hadn't been captured, and so there were very few men, around. And so the women kind of took over in the beginning, and then when the men finally were demobilized or escaped or whatever, they came back and they took charge. But the women were really, really important in the beginning, and were important all the way through the war, except that the men took all the executive positions, and the women were doing incredibly essential work. Like running escape lines, like being couriers, some of them were spies, but they no longer had the positions that they had initially.
So, actually, and it's true. Isn't it true that you'll have to buy the book to get into this? But Germaine, actually, her original doctoral work is lost because she's taken prisoner. Right. So she basically redoes her doctoral work by studying the camps.
Yeah, she actually thought. When they were sent to Ravensbrück, these women, nobody really knew what was happening in the concentration camps. I think most people had the idea they were like prisoner of war camps, and she was hoping. She actually had all her research in a big jute. Bag that she lugged along with her to Ravensbrück, thinking she was going to have time to work on her dissertation. Well, the moment she got there, they took it away from her, and so you're right. Instead of she no longer had all of her the 6 years worth of notes, etc. That to write about the Berber tribes. So she studied how Ravensbrück operated. And that was just incredibly important because it gave her, Ravensbrück was horrific. I mean, everything about Ravensbrück was horrific. It was a petri dish of disease. Cruelty, the killings, the way prisoners were treated was awful. And so, most prisoners, not expecting this at all, were just totally felt helpless. Germaine was able, because of her background, because of her training, she was able to detach herself from that and kind of step back, as a scientist, and just see how this place was run. And by doing that, she was able then to explain it to the newcomers who were flooding into Ravensbrück from France. And as I said, telling them how it worked, and if they banded together, if they joined together, if they created friendships, if they took care of each other, that they had a chance. And she explained the difference between, this was a labor camp. Ravensbrück, it sounds better than an extermination camp like Auschwitz or Treblinka in Poland, but in fact, it was an extermination camp, only much slower. So Ravensbrück, as a labor camp, sent the inmates, the women, as slave laborers to work in factories near Ravensbrück, or around Germany. But the work, it was horrific work. And these women were going to die. I mean, they had almost no food. Disease was everywhere. They were treated horribly. They were beaten, often killed. And so the length of time that you were there was probably just a few months before you got sick enough or weak enough and then when you couldn't work anymore, then they executed you. So it was it was a death camp in a sense. It was just a slow death camp. But she figured out how that there were chinks there, that women could take advantage of. And so she really educated the youngest. A lot of these women were really young. They were in their late teens, early 20s. She was in her 30s. She was a bit older. So she was really, really important in the whole effort to survive.
So before we get back to talking about the women that you've written about, I just want to stay for a moment on the subject of Ravensbrück. And Chris, I think there's a picture of the camp, and maybe we can throw that.
Yeah,
up
I was waiting for a moment to come up.
But this, we tend to think of death camps or labor camps as being primarily for Jewish prisoners, and I could be wrong, but my understanding from reading your book is that the Jews were in a minority here. This was really a camp of criminals, people in the resistance, etc. I mean, can you talk a little bit more about Ravensbrück, what it is and who is there, at least when the story starts, because obviously a ton more people come in as the war goes on.
Right. Rick, you're right. It was mostly about 130,000 people women were actually at Ravensbrück during the war. And they came from, most of them, actually about 80% of them were from resistance movements from all of the countries of occupied Europe. The earliest inmates were German, women who had been involved in the German resistance, Czechs, Poles, the countries that were defeated first by Germany, Russia. And then later on in the war, that's when Western European resistance members came, France, Belgium, the Netherlands, Luxembourg, etc. So that they were from all over, and very few of them were Jews. There were some Jews among the resistors, but when the final solution was first started by the Germans in 1942, then most the Jews who were known were taken to Auschwitz and were killed there. But as the war went on, and we can talk about this later, but as the war went on, more and more Jews did come. They were in the last few months of the last year of the war, they were coming from Auschwitz. Auschwitz was closing down because the Soviets were coming, and they stopped the gas chambers, and so they brought all the women to Ravensbrück. And so at the end of the war, there were 8,000 Jewish women in Ravensbrück.
Yeah. And amongst some of the inmates, Lynn, they play sort of a important part in your book because they appear throughout. Who are the rabbits?
The rabbits, that's a great story. The rabbits were young Polish prisoners. I say in the book, I mean, as you made reference to, I've written a lot about the Poles in several of my books. The Polish resistance movement was the strongest, most active resistance movement in all of occupied Europe. As we were just discussing, the Poles had been invaded over and over, and they are very, 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 very active resistors. And they certainly were during World War II. So the largest group at Ravensbrück were Poles. There were many, many more Poles than any other group. Many of them were young Polish resistance members. And in 1942, they became, a number of them, about less than 100, about 70, 80 of these young Poles were used as guinea pigs in a series of horrific medical experiments performed by German Nazi doctors, in which basically involved their legs, and their legs were sliced open, and all sorts of germs and disgusting, awful things were inserted in their legs. They were sliced open to the bone. And it was to see, I mean, it's a long story, but it was basically to see if the new sulfa drugs really worked, or, but it was, I mean, there was no real reason for it. They were just doing it. And these women, many of them died from the infection, horrific infections. And the ones who didn't die, almost all of them were crippled to some extent. And so this happened in 42, 43. And these young Poles didn't take it lying down. I mean, they tried to resist within the camp. I mean, it was impossible to, but it was really awful. And those experiments and what happened to those young women kind of unified the camp to a large degree. And the other prisoners, the other inmates, really united around these young Poles, to the extent that at the end of the war, as the war was about to be over, in early 1945, everybody knew that the Germans were going to try to execute all of the Polish survivors to make sure that there were no witnesses to what the awful things that had been done to them. And I go into great detail. In February of 1945, this actually occurred. The underground intelligence system within Ravensbrück was really, really good. So word got out among the inmates that this was going to happen. And the day before, the camp banded together, basically, and they vowed that they weren't going to let this happen. And plans were made to spirit these young Poles out of the barracks that they were in. And that's what happened. They created this great kind of rebellion. And they got these young Poles out and hid them, had put them in pre-planned hiding places. And I must explain that the camp was overrun by that time. It was just that the administrative structure really had broken down. So they were actually able to do this, and they did. They smuggled these young Poles out, hid them all over the camp, and for the next however many weeks of the war, 2 or 3 months, those young Poles stayed hidden. Not one of them was executed. It was talk about resistance. It was a camp-wide resistance against the Germans, and they won.
Which is shocking because it's not something we think of happening in the camps. Chris,
So
maybe you could.
wait. I'm going to just say, I just want to put the book title up again, guys. We're halfway through. This is the book that we're talking about, The Sisterhood of Ravensbrück, how an intrepid band of French women resisted the Nazis in Hitler's all-female concentration camp. Okay.
That is so beautiful because I was just about to ask you to do that, and now
we're like simpatico now.
I love seeing you embracing the control of all the imagery and the whole show. This is a breakthrough moment for you, Chris, and I toast you. Here's to you.
Yes. Oh, thank you.
Lynn, Chris just asked who the rabbits were, so I'll ask a fairly simple question with a complex answer to put it on you, which is, what does the word I'm gonna have to look it up to make sure I have it correctly. It just went away. Verfügbar. What does the word verfügbar mean to you?
Yeah, it is that's a long answer. Well, verfügbar basically was a German word for prisoners who did no work, who tried to get out of doing work, and it plays an important role in my book because Germaine Tillion not only was an amazing anthropologist and leader, she also was a great. She wrote an operetta. She wrote a musical review operetta in the camp, and the reason that she wrote it in 1944, and the reason she did is because basically this was after D-Day. And women were dying like flies in the camp. I mean, and basically there was tremendous despair. The Allies had landed in France, but the women were sure that they were not going to be alive at the end of the war, that the Allies were not going to get there in time. And so Germaine Tillion was an amazing, as I said, was an amazing leader. And she basically said, we've got to make people laugh. And as an anthropologist, she knew how important laughter was, how important it was to make fun of your enemy or your persecutor. That you regain some power when you're able to do that. And so she set out to write she called it a musical review or an operetta about Verfügbar, which meant prisoners, as I said, who did everything they could to get out of work. She was one of them. She was incredibly good at hiding and at finding ways to not have to work. And she did that on purpose. It wasn't just because she refused to do anything to contribute to the German war effort. And so she was extremely skilled at it. So she thought she would take this idea and make it into a musical. So she came from a very musical family. Her father had, loved music, loved the opera. And sorry, my phone is ringing. See, even I.
The least of our problems.
So she grew up with a lot of music. She went to concerts. She went to cabarets. She knew classical music and she knew modern music. Cabaret music, radio commercials, etc. So she was very familiar. So she sat down and she actually hid. She was on one of her very rare work details, but she was with a lot of friends who were taking care of her. And she hid in a box for 10 days and wrote this musical called Their Food Bar, and about basically it's about a group like her of inmates who hid. The main character was kind of a naturalist who looked at these women and saw them as like, rare, like animals. And so this review was filled with music, was filled with dancing, and of course she couldn't perform it. They could not perform it. I mean, that was out of the question. But she would come back to the barracks every night and sing the songs that she had composed that day, or did the dance or whatever. And she taught the women in her barracks, the French women in her barracks, to do the same. So they learned all these songs. And then when they would march to their work detail, they would sing these songs that were making fun of the Nazis. While the German guards, the Nazi guards, were marching along with them, not having any idea what those lyrics were all about. And it really did boost the spirits of the women. It was an incredible. It was just really quite stunning what she did. It wasn't just making fun of them. It was also filled with kind of poignancy about what they missed in France, about the food. Food was what these women talked about all the time, all kinds of food. And so she included that. And it's a really amazing piece of amazing work. Pardon?
No, I was going to just ask you, Chris. There's a question from Cheryl Holt about this.
Yeah, well, I was gonna. Yeah.
Go ahead.
So, Cheryl, one of our longtime viewers, I know. I wanted Lynne to talk about kind of what happens with this work. You go into a great deal of detail, and I think it's one of the most moving parts of the story about how this piece of art is eventually brought to the stage.
Right.
And so tell us a bit about that. And then again, Cheryl wants to know if you were able to see the production, and she also wants to know if there are any plans to stage it again. So I was getting to that, Rick. So
Chris, it is clear that we are two brains separated by the internet. So.
And
So there we go.
Coughing attack. Sorry.
Yes.
That's a great question, Cheryl.
You're so amusing that you're choking with laughter. I totally get it.
Okay, yes, I am choking with laughter. So she writes this, and people loved it. And then when the war ended, she tucked it away because she and others basically felt that, with all the controversy about what happened after the war, about the way the French responded, she didn't want to be accused of making fun or having a laugh about what happened in a concentration camp. Mm-hmm. So she tucked it away for 50 some years, and when she was in her 90s, she in her mid 90s, through a number. Take too long to talk about why, but a small book publisher was given a copy of it, saw a copy of it, and asked to publish it. And many of the people who had been with Germaine at Ravensbrück did not want it to be published because they were afraid of a backlash. But Germaine agreed. So, I guess when she was about 97, we're talking about 2005, 6. So it was published, and about 2006, the new director of a very famous theater in Paris was walking by a bookstore and saw it in the window and went in and bought it. And he decided, it was the Châtelet Theater, and he decided, he was getting a lot of grief because he wanted to do a lot of modern productions, and the French critics were all up in arms. And he decided, okay, I want to make this one of my productions in my first year. And Germain agreed to that. And it, in 2006, I believe, this director organized his group of people at the Châtelet Theater, and they started working on this production. Talk about how difficult it was for these people to do that. I mean, first of all, it had never been performed, and she didn't include the provenance of the music. I mean, some of it was pretty obvious from the lyrics what song it was, but a lot of it wasn't. They didn't really know. And at this point, she's 97, 98 years old, and so she really can't help that much. And then there was no orchestra, so they decided to have an orchestra, and then they had to decide, okay, what instruments, and then how are you going to do it? I mean, how can you do a operetta musical review that makes fun of the Nazis in a concentration camp? And so there was a real nervousness on the part not only of the survivors, but also of the people who were working on it. Is this going to work? And it cut to the chase. It came out. It was shown on 3 consecutive nights and I'm blanking on I think it was 2007, the same year that Germaine turned 100. She was still alive, and it was just an absolute smash. It was just so incredibly powerful, and it was hugely popular, and to this day, it's still being performed. One can go on the internet and find it. You can actually see it, and it's obviously in French, but it is really stunning, and they did a brilliant job. And it was taken the next year. The Châtelet Theater took it to Ravensbrück and actually produced it.
Wow.
The square where the women had roll calls every day. It was stunning. And Cheryl's question was really interesting because it was a few years later, the University of Southern Maine put it on in Portland. I talked to Megan Brody, who is the director of the show, of the theater. She was a theater professor at the university. And it was so fascinating talking to her because these were kids from Maine. I mean, they were almost all white. They had not, they didn't know much about the Holocaust, almost nothing about the Holocaust. So they were given a tutorial about that. But she talked about how, the cast was sitting around the table, and she basically pointed out that each one of them, even though they were white, each one of them, there was something about them that could have sent them to Ravensbrück. So in other words, some were Jewish, some were gay, some of them had disabilities. So they could have ended up in Ravensbrück. And those kids banded together. They agreed to cut off their hair. Some of them had their heads shaved. Some of them just had very, very short hair. They banded together like the women had at Ravensbrück. And she said it was extraordinary to see these young women, 18, 19, 20, 21 years old, become like the women they were portraying. And she said that the caring, are you cold? Do you need my sweater? They were doing exactly what the women at Ravensbrück did. And she said when the production actually occurred, I think they had 5 nights. And she said after every night, they gathered together and cried. It was so incredibly. I mean, I started crying when she was talking about this, and her voice choked up. I mean, this was a number of years ago, and she still said it's the most important thing she's ever done in her life. And so, Germain's wonderful idea to make people laugh has really had resonance, a lot of resonance.
So in fact, so speaking of Germain again, and again, I found what happens to these women at the end just one of the most compelling parts of the book, because you pick it up, you're like, oh, the resistance, that's interesting, and it's the things that you don't think about. And so one of the things that really struck me, again, it's the war has ended, they've been liberated, and Germain says liberation was a terrible thing. Why did you say that? Why did you say that?
Because they were looking so forward. That's what they were living for, is to be liberated, to be free. But once that happened, I should explain that Germain's mother was murdered in the camp. Her mother, Emily, was in the camp, and not long before the end of the war, she was sent to the gas chamber. And she was the most important person in Germain's life. And Germain herself wanted to die at that point, but then basically said, no, I can't. I mean, I need to bear witness to what happened. But, you can imagine, I mean, this is all they wanted, is to be liberated. And then when it happened, it's, okay, what happens next? And it was just, they had been through such hell that it took them, they actually never fully recovered, but it took them a great long time to finally get to a place where they could live with what they had been through. And the way they did it is, again, banding together and helping each other. I mean, one of the things, there's so many things I learned and didn't really know. I mean, I actually thought, okay, they're going to come out, it's going to be okay. They're going to have a nice life after. It was horrific for most of them, because they went back to a country that basically didn't want to hear about what had happened to them. I mean, France had not covered itself in glory, to put it mildly. It had collaborated. It had not come to grips with that. Most of the people in France, while they hadn't been active collaborators, they certainly had kept their heads down. Very, very few actually resisted. So they wanted to turn the page. They wanted, a new life. Okay, the war is over. Let's look to the future. And they basically shunned these women and men who came back from the camps, who were, walking examples of the horrors that had been, that France had experienced, or that many people in France had experienced. And so they not only, when they were liberated and came back, they not only were not greeted with love and appreciation by a lot of people, they were actually shunned and told to just don't talk. We don't want to hear any more about it. And so as a result, they banded together again. They formed their own organization to help each other survive, just as they had helped each other survive in the camp. And they also formed the organization to basically say to the French public and the French government, you cannot overlook us. You cannot forget us. We, the women survivors, did everything the men did during the resistance. We contributed just as much. We suffered and sacrificed just as much or more as the men. And we demand recognition. And it was kind of a great kind of a achievement, because we haven't really talked about how women were treated in France. France was a very and still is to some extent a very conservative patriarchal society, and basically regarded women as second-class citizens, thinking that their only roles were as wives and mothers. And these women obviously never agreed to that, and so they were taking a stand. They were just saying, okay, we are in charge of our own lives. And that was quite revolutionary.
Yeah.
So there's some images that I'd love for Chris to show here. They're
Yep.
drawings, and they're drawings by Violet Lecoq, I think is how you say her name. Can you tell us a little bit about these images and how they came to be and how she got them out of the camp and how they got into your book? I mean, because they're pretty cool.
Yeah, Violet Lecoq was a French woman who was actually a nurse, but she was also an amateur artist, and she did a series of incredibly powerful. The one you have on the screen now it's the title is Friendship, Amate, and there are obviously two inmates, one holding another, and showing exactly what we've been talking about, how they really depended on each other to keep each other alive. But she also, I think you have a couple more that.
Yep. I'm going to just kind of put them up there.
This is a fantastic one. I think it's called "They Were 40,000." Basically, I mean, you can see the long line of prisoners going, on to the horizon. At one point there were 40,000 women in this camp, and it was just so vastly overcrowded. But it's just a wonderful way of showing that this. One of the reasons I use a lot of her drawings is because obviously there are no photos of what happened, the cruelty of the Nazis toward these prisoners. And she has several incredibly powerful, searing drawings showing this. This particular one, the woman, the German guard who's beating the prisoner is in fact was one of the real guards. She was in charge of the guard. She was a blonde. She was quite lovely, apparently, but she was a monster. She was just awful. She killed prisoners doing what she's doing to this prisoner, beating them to death. And so, they're graphic, but they give you a sense of what it was really like. There, she did this. She drew these at night. She managed to get a hold of paper and pens, and she was taking her life in her hands, because if they had been found, she would have been killed. But she managed to hide them, and she got them out of Ravensbrück. And they're very hard to find. I mean, I think that I don't know how many, 10, 15, 20 portfolios of those drawings are still exist. And one of them is at the Holocaust Museum archives. And that's where I saw it, here in Washington.
Mm-hmm.
So we're kind of coming to the end, and there's just so much that we didn't get to talk to. So I'll do my initial plug here. It's just a stellar book, and there's just so I hadn't even occurred to me. And you will be moved. You'll be shocked. You'll be all. One of the things that you talk about is there's a woman who gets to know Germaine and some of these others, and they work together on a film. And you talk about that, but she says, this is Isabel who does this work. She says, my brothers and I, witness to the force that united these women. The warm tenderness they had for one another at Ravensbrück were without this fraternity, they could not have survived. So talk kind of how important that was, and why that sustained them.
Well, I mean, it really, that to me was one of the, they really were sisters. They were as much sisters as blood sisters. They considered
they have a lot of fans there.
Yeah, probably robocalls, actually. One of the things that really struck me is how they stayed close, those four women, and others too, but those four women in particular stayed close until the end of their lives, and they all lived to an old age. So, when something bad happened to one, if a husband died or a child died, those women were there. within minutes to be with that person. And the bonds between these women was just extraordinary. And it was just so moving. This book is the most moving book in many ways that I've read.
Yeah, really, seriously.
The power of love. I mean, the power of community.
Togetherness.
Yeah. I mean, it's just really quite stunning that they managed to. They never got over what they had been through, but they were able to kind of surmount it thanks to each other.
Do you think I couldn't help but thinking, reading the book, I know we're kind of at the end, but an awkward question, but do you think that this is something that's unique to women, that this togetherness, came about because these are women, or is this something that just was another, that was just one of many set of circumstances that led to it?
No, I actually do think it's because they were
I
women.
do, yeah.
I think women, we're basically raised to take care of other people. I mean, I certainly was, and I think women, just in general, I mean, that's what we do, and so I think it really was. I mean, I have not done any research myself, but I've read a bit about all male camps in which this didn't happen. I mean, there were friendships.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
This kind of wholesale, I mean, this community, forming of community, because men, are I think are conditioned very differently, and I think that was one of the real benefits of being a woman. So I definitely think it's
Okay.
partly that.
Thank you.
Well, Lynn, you just have to write 2 more books, and then Rick will send you a hat. So what's next?
Well, I'm actually working on a book that is. I mean, I loved doing Sisterhood. I did, but it was fairly grim.
Yeah.
But I'm doing something that is really kind of fun. It's a book on the Louvre during World War
good.
II. And it's the title, which I think will be the title. It's The Louvre at War: How the World's Greatest Museum became a hotbed of resistance against the Nazis, which it did.
Nice.
Yeah.
Most people don't know, but it's a great story. It really is. It's fun. It's really kind of a thriller of what the people, particularly the main guy in the book, the hero in the book is a guy named Jacques Jaujard, who was the director of the Louvre, and did extraordinary things during the war.
Well, hopefully by the time when it comes out, by then Rick will have a new computer, and it'll all be like
Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. Lynne Olson, thank you so
Thank
much.
you so
We
much,
wanna
Lynn.
So much fun being back, guys.
We want to remind people that your book is called The Sisterhood of
Yep, give me a second.
Ravensbrück.
I'm working on it.
Maybe we
Yep,
can throw the
yep.
title up there one more time.
Yeah.
And it is a terrific book and a wonderful story, amazing characters. We didn't even get to talk about Charles de Gaulle's niece, who is also
Oh, there's so
one of
much
the
in
women
here.
in this book.
Right.
So there's so much here that we haven't even gotten to. So please check it out.
All right. Thanks, Lynn.
And Lynn, thank you so much for joining us, and we appreciate it.
I loved it. Thanks.
Thanks.
Okay, take care.
Bye. All right. All right.
Bye in a moment.
Right.
Yeah, okay. Oh, woo.
All right.
All right.
All right. So now, and then next week, here we go.
Next week we have
Ta-da!
the story of the U-505 and the book Phantom Fleet by Alexander Rose. The U-505 is a submarine that Chris and I have toured together at the Science Museum in Chicago. And so there's a great story about the capture of this sub. And we're going to present that story with Alexander Rose next week when I will be in...
We'll be on a boat. We'll be on the boat together. It's kind of eerie and prophetic, isn't it?
I don't know. Next week. So today is what, July, what date is today?
8th.
July 8th?
8th.
So it's the 15th. I'm not going to be on the boat yet. I think I'm going to be in...
So I'm going to be on the boat alone with the U-boats. Thanks very much.
Yeah. Good luck with that.
Hi.
I think I'm going to be on solid dry land in Munich,
Oh,
having just gone out to the Hofbrauhaus that day. So hopefully I
excellent.
can stay sober enough to do the show. Um, Guys, thank you so much for joining us. Please, and my notes have gone. So, check us out on Facebook,
Yes.
Blue Sky, etc. And, browse us on the web at historyhappyhour.com. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, everybody. Be safe. Bye bye.